My grandfather died 10 years ago, but the mail in this house is still being opened. I just inherited a mansion in a town that doesn't appear on any modern map. They told me he lived alone, but the deep scratches on the inside of the front door tell a very different story. Moving here was supposed to be my fresh start, a free house, miles away from the city noise. But as I walked through these cold halls, I realized my grandfather didn't just leave me a property, he left me a prison. In the next 20 minutes, I'm going to show you exactly what I found hidden behind the wallpaper of the master bedroom, and the terrifying reason why the local villagers refuse to even look at this house after sunset. The drive to Blackwood Manor took 6 hours. The further I drove, the more the radio static grew until it became a low, rhythmic, pulsing sound, almost like a heartbeat. When I finally reached the iron gates, I found a small leather notebook tucked under the porch mat. It only had one sentence written over and over in frantic, messy ink. Don't count the windows from the outside. Naturally, the first thing I did was look up. 1, 2, 3, 7 windows on the second floor. But when I stepped inside and walked the upper hallway, there were only 6 doors. I checked again, and my blood ran cold. 1 window was missing a room. So, what exactly is behind that 7th window? I spent the afternoon digging through a heavy oak trunk I found in the study. Inside, I found letters from my parents, dated 20 years ago, all of them begging my grandfather to sell this place. They called it the stain on our bloodline. I remember the hushed arguments through the walls when I was a child, my father shouting that the house was changing him, and my mother crying because my grandfather had started talking to people who weren't there. Among the letters, I found my grandfather's old journals. He wasn't just a recluse, he was a man obsessed. He wrote about the silent tenant, something he claimed lived in the foundation of the house long before the bricks were even laid. He believed that the manor was a lid, keeping something pressed down into the earth. The most chilling part? A legal document showing he spent his entire fortune on specialized soundproofing and reinforced locks, not to keep people out, but to make sure whatever was inside never heard the world outside. My parents cut him off shortly after that. They told me he was mad, but looking at the heavy, vibration-resistant padding behind the library walls, I'm starting to think he was the only sane one in our family. Nightfall in this valley doesn't just bring darkness, it brings a heavy, suffocating silence. Around 2 a.m., I was woken up by a sound that didn't belong in a house, a wet, dragging noise coming from inside the walls. I grabbed my flashlight and headed toward the kitchen, where the sound was loudest. That's when I saw them. Not ghosts, but physical evidence. In the layer of dust near the pantry, there were tracks. At first, I thought they were large canine prints, but as I knelt closer, I realized the anatomy was impossible. They had elongated, needle-like digit marks that punctured through the floorboards rather than resting on them. Following the trail, I found patches of a translucent, oily substance smeared against the baseboards. It smelled like ozone and old copper. But the most terrifying discovery was in the dining room. High up on the ceiling, nearly 7 feet off the ground, were long, deep gouges in the plaster. It looked as if something with incredible strength had tried to anchor itself there, something that didn't care about gravity. My grandfather wasn't crazy, he wasn't hiding from people. He was living with things that don't belong in our biology. Couldn't stay inside that house anymore. I needed answers, so I drove to the nearest cluster of houses 3 miles down the road. But as I approached, I realized the village was just as wrong as the manor. Every single house had its windows facing away from my grandfather's land, as if the entire town was collectively turning its back on a plague. I saw them in the fields, the neighbors. They were standing in a perfect circle, facing the direction of my house. They weren't praying, they were chanting in a low, guttural vibration that made the air feel thick. In the center of their circle sat a crude wooden effigy of the manor, covered in fresh animal blood. When one of the elders spotted me, he didn't look angry, he looked terrified for me. He whispered a warning that chilled me to the bone. The debt hasn't been paid in 10 years. Your grandfather kept the silence with his blood, but you brought the noise back. I realized then that the specialized locks and the soundproofing weren't for protection. They were part of a ritual, The town wasn't protecting me from the house. They were using the house to keep that non-human thing fed and contained. And now that I've opened the doors, the containment is failing. Ran back to the house, the old man's words screaming in my head. I had to find that 7th room. If the house was a prison, then the missing window was the observation cell. I went to the 2nd floor hallway, right between the 3rd and 4th doors, and started tearing at the heavy wood paneling with a crowbar. Behind the expensive oak, there wasn't a wall. There was a heavy, industrial steel door, cold to the touch. It wasn't locked from the outside. It was bolted from the inside. When I finally forced it open, the smell of ozone and rotted meat hit me like a physical blow. The room was perfectly circular, lined with mirrors that faced a single high-backed chair in the center. My grandfather's skeleton was still there, sitting upright, his bony hands still gripping the armrests. But he didn't die of old age. His ribcage was burst outward, as if something had hatched from within him. On the mirrors, written in his own dried blood, were the coordinates of every person in our bloodline. My parents, my cousins, and me. The 7th window wasn't meant to look out at the world. It was a lens focusing the silent tenant's hunger onto us. I heard a wet, clicking sound from the ceiling above me. I looked up, and for the first time, I saw it. It didn't have a face, but it had my grandfather's voice. I realized too late that my grandfather didn't die trying to stop it. He died becoming its vessel. And as the creature began to unfurl its impossible limbs from the shadows of the ceiling, I noticed the heavy steel door behind me was slowly swinging shut. The ritual isn't over. The silence hasn't been broken. It's just found a new voice. Stay tuned for the final chapter. I don't know if I'll be the one telling it. The steel door slammed shut with a sound that felt like a coffin lid closing. I was trapped in the 7th room with the remains of my grandfather and the thing that had hollowed him out. The creature didn't attack. It just hovered there, its translucent limbs vibrating at a frequency that made my teeth ache. Then the whispers started. It wasn't speaking into my ears. It was speaking through my memories. I understood the truth in that final, suffocating silence. This house wasn't built to contain a monster. It was a harvest house. Every 100 years, the bloodline must provide a new, silent tenant. My grandfather hadn't been a hero. He had been a guardian of this curse, waiting for me to grow old enough, curious enough to take his place. As the oily substance from the ceiling began to drip onto my shoulders, my vision started to fracture. I could see through the mirrors. I could see my parents in their home, miles away, suddenly looking around as if they heard my heartbeat. I realized then why the villagers chanted. They weren't praying for me. They were thanking the house for choosing a new victim so they could live in peace for another century. My name is now written on the mirrors in fresh, warm red. I am the silence now, and if you are hearing this, it's because the house is already looking for the next heir. I can feel the cold metal of the chair against my spine, but I can no longer feel my own breath. The mirrors are no longer showing my reflection. They're showing windows into the lives of everyone I've ever loved. I am the watcher now. I am the prisoner. The transition is almost complete, and as my voice fades into this static, I realize that some inheritances are not gifts. They're sentences. My story ends here, in the room that doesn't exist, but yours is just beginning. Every shadow you see from the corner of your eye, every floorboard that creaks when you're alone, that's just the house reaching out. Don't look for me. Don't come to Blackwood. Because once you enter the 7th window, the silence never lets you go. If you think this house was a nightmare, you haven't seen the digital traps waiting for you in your own pocket. Don't forget to watch this next video to learn why you should never download any unknown apps on your phone. Some monsters don't need a house. They just need an install button.